Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry and Company Data at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be talking about AI infrastructure, the underpinnings that are making AI possible. And joining me to discuss that is analyst Greg Macatee. Greg, welcome to the podcast.
Eric, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. We have just over a month ago, published a new study on AI infrastructure. This is a field that is evolving so rapidly if we think about everything that's been taking place and certainly the intense interest that enterprises are generating around it. What are you seeing, and what's the takeaway from the study work and some of the research work you've been doing?
Yeah, it certainly is the wild, wild west. And as you alluded to, we just recently published our Vote AI and Machine Learning Infrastructure 2025 survey. So that was conducted, I believe it started in May and wrapped up in June with 704 decision makers on the IT side from the United States, United Kingdom, and India. So it's a annual update to what we do for this family of surveys. And I think some of the main takeaways were really interesting and just kind of, front and center. It's not just all hype. 94% of our respondents said that AI infrastructure gives their organization some sort of competitive advantage. And 95% have seen some level of benefits for the organization, whether that be increased revenue, cut costs, risk reduction. And that could be in any department, internal, it could be external facing. So really, really exciting results there. But I think kind of going between the hash marks, what I thought was really, really interesting in terms of our panel itself is there's a bit more progress in the market this year than versus last. I think last year, everyone was just making this mad dash into the market. And that's certainly true to a certain extent this year as well, but we're starting to see some advancement proliferation among our more advanced respondents. To give you an example, the median number of models in the study that are actually in production stages was 5, and the mean is 206. So thinking back to statistics class, that long right tail, we have some people really moving along, in their roadmaps there. And then, for the bulk of them, the 5 models, they're getting there. They're starting to do things. They're starting to realize value. So kind of that twin peaked approach there was something really nice to be seen in this.
One of those things that we see actually in a number of other places around AI, but this barbell curve of you've got the folks who are at the far end of this are just moving fast. And then there are a whole bunch of folks who are still working on catching up and really starting to leverage some of these benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's certainly nothing wrong with being on that other end. I think you can take the lessons that you're seeing from those that went before you and really start to apply them as well as you grow your capabilities and scale.
Well, we actually in a previous episode, we're just talking about levels of project failure. And, that's one of those things, if you look at the work that Alex Johnston's been doing, we're in this sort of middle ground in which a lot of people dashed out of there, stood up a whole set of proof of concepts, and then realized that making that journey to full production is a challenge on a bunch of different fronts. And a lot of those are related to infrastructure issues.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the single most commonly found points of failure. And getting back to what defines success, I talked to a lot of different executive decision makers and specifically CIOs, and the numbers that stands out to me is if they can be anywhere between 20 and 30% a success rate, that keeps them pretty happy.
Well, and in an IT operational perspective, that's still a little on the low side. So, but again, this stuff's not simple.
No, it really isn't. And, there are just so many facets of part of the IT stack. We asked our respondents to rate their level of challenges on a scale of 1 to 5, and that could be between compute, storage, networking, data management, and security, on-prem, at the cloud, at the edge. And the results were pretty ubiquitous that some really serious challenges exist in all the categories for many of our respondents. I think it was somewhere close to 60% of them had either moderate to severe challenges in all aspects.
And it, again, just goes to point out, this is a very different beast than a lot of the IT projects that, enterprises have typically tackled. And it's putting strains on infrastructure in ways that are different. It's something interesting we see, on a bunch of different fronts. Some of these concerns about whether or not infrastructure is AI ready, but even among those that are getting, a little further down the road, in many cases, they're coming up with unexpected challenges. Yes, you've got lots of data, but is the data where you need it to be? Is the infrastructure able to move effectively between your on-prem and your cloud environments? We see, if you take a look at the broader data around where we are from a hybrid perspective, and the fact that organizations really seem to be settling on hybrid models. Well, typical application, your average application architectures haven't been stressing those hybrid models in ways that AI all of a sudden puts a whole set of demands on these that we just haven't seen before.
Yeah, I think another challenge is it's just the level of uncertainty in the market and how big these projects get at scale. We're talking into the trillions of parameters now, theoretically. Vendors are starting to talk in that language, trillions, not billions. And that has major, major implications in terms of the amount of data that's just being moved from models themselves, let alone all the other data assets that exist in the background, and trying to link all these things together. It just continues to pile on and get more challenging, both on the technical side as well as the operational side as well. What are you doing in the business to be good stewards of that data and to be good stewards of those models as well is kind of it's the other side of the equation. It's what they're really, I feel like not considering enough as they make their way farther down the line.
Well, it's the life cycle issues. It's the day two operational stuff, and that so often it's the challenge that bites us, in IT projects, but it's doubly so in AI, especially when what you're working with is changing so rapidly. If you haven't built into your operational process that, oh, by the way, you want to retrain on new models, with some really significant frequency. And you got to move those models around. You got to move the data around to go train the models. You got to provide telemetry on model performance. Oh, and by the way, how are you backhauling the telemetry from the point of inference where you're actually starting to do the real work? Yeah, it's a set of things that, again, we typically haven't had to deal with at this kind of scale.
No, and to go along with that, I think things are just changing so rapidly. And that's one of the things that makes my job as fun as it is. It seems like every week or two, we're talking about something completely different. So all the challenges that you listed, those are going to be consistent throughout projects, both now and into the future. But, who knows what we're going to be talking about, 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now. How do you balance all of those changes with finding real value in your organization?
Well, I guess, so what's your take in terms of how organizations should be thinking about dealing with what is this crazy environment that, in which the ecosystem itself is evolving so rapidly, the technology is evolving so rapidly. Oh, by the way, we're about to go throw a whole herd of agents at this that is going to increase certainly the speed of a lot of the queries that's happening. I mean, there's just keeping track of this as your average enterprise is a challenge. Are there ways to be able to look at this to help to at least create something of a path forward?
Yeah, and I think it's something that you and I have talked about before. Just the one real take-home message is start small and break those compartmentalized, bite-sized pieces up, and take what you learn from them. What did you succeed at? Where were your blind spots, and apply them while growing at scale. And it might even make sense to start with a project that you're really, really good at doing to help kind of get a better wrap around what those specific AI tools and models are doing. And then from there, being able to quantify that value. It's something you're very, very familiar with, being able to communicate it and going from there. And I think something else to go along with this is not only starting small, but putting the proper fundamentals in place early on. We think about security, we think about governance. that's a lot harder to undo than it is to just do it correctly in the first place. To go along with that, I think, it's sometimes the simplest answer is the best one. Uh, Employee training as well to go with this. Regular and thorough employee training. That's really where it starts. Both increasing, and you had mentioned Alex study. One of the main inhibitors was employee resistance. So how do you start to kind of demystify that and get them more familiar with that training as well?
Well, and you point out one of the things that I think is also really important in this is that AI starts to bring in a much broader set of stakeholders because you're tackling some bigger problems. You're doing a set of things that have much wider scope. Typically, you've got all of the data issues about the regulatory and compliance pieces around data, a lot of the other aspects that got to get rolled into that. But the extent to which you can get your organization onto an AI thinking footing, the more successful you are there, the more successful you're going to be in terms of how that you actually are readying your organization and the workforce itself to understand what this transition looks like.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point there. Our study identified, I think it was just about 20 different unique personas that are involved at some point in the AI infrastructure process, let alone all the other aspects that go with it. It's still predominantly led by IT, but the number of voices in the room is growing, and they're growing quickly.
You got legal, you got HR. I mean, again, if you look at the breadth of use cases, you got all these different elements within the enterprise that are starting to leverage this. The other thing I think that was really important that you pointed out, and this actually was something we were talking about data integration with Emily Jasper a couple episodes ago. It was iterate. Start small and continue to work and hone the capabilities you have, but do it in ways that help you manage risk. Because again, if we're at a point at which we're seeing 20 and 30% success rates on projects, that starts to be a bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, and it's just so important to get it right the first time. I think back to a conversation that I had with a customer a couple months ago. They had experienced an incident, and this was as they were just starting to get their hands and minds wrapped around their AI capabilities, and the level of scrutiny that they faced, both from the public as well as regulators, that is a lasting impact to this day, and it's still an inhibitor to them, really starting to go even farther forward with some business initiatives and projects of their own.
Well, that if you think about one of the, not only do you have the internal visibility, and it's like, oh, this is our AI project, and this is really, it's an amazing, and all the rest of that. Because it's an AI project, it's going to attract attention in ways that are both positive and negative. And you need to understand what's involved in making sure that actually continues to that you can work through a lot of the challenges that happens to present, and actually come at it with an expectation that, hey, that level of visibility is going to mean that you do have a set of things you're going to need to work with. So a whole set of challenges in ways that are, once again, a lot of significantly different than the way in which we've approached IT projects, historically.
Yeah, and it gets back to that installing the proper fundamentals early. Like, issues are going to happen. Not every project is going to succeed, but if you have those fundamentals in place, you're much better positioned to be able to rectify the situation quickly and move forward.
So in terms of fundamentals, from an infrastructure perspective, I mean, we've talked about data. I'm curious what your take is in terms of the kinds of things that organizations have to put in place. Where are they seeing challenges? You called out a few of these. I'm curious about where this should be heading, and just from an enterprise awareness perspective, where should they be thinking about going and planning infrastructure expenditures, plans, growth as they look towards the future?
Yeah, and I think it comes as no surprise as when you ask them, what do you want more of? Everyone says GPUs, understandably. If I had more GPUs, I'd probably sell them on eBay. But putting those GPUs to work clearly by and far the number one result. But we touched on data and the in between the hash marks, those responses 3 through 5, all had to do, it was storage, it was networking, and it was memory. Everything has to do with data. And by storage, I mean storage performance. We also need a lot more storage to handle all the data too. But there are all these different technologies that are starting to make their way now that are incrementally driving the value of that data. And a lot of it happens in the software stack that I think is really going to be something really interesting to keep an eye on going forward. And these optimizations can happen anywhere from models to frameworks to inference servers to the infrastructure itself. So that kind of holistic picture there, and what we see going on in the market, it's a lot of modularity there and combining bits and pieces, pulling all those levers and ultimately getting the best return on investment, the best bang for your buck.
Well, it's again, modularity. It's the other thing we hear a lot of, right? Which is those sets of concerns about how do we build this in sufficient chunks so that we've got flexibility, so we don't lock into any one particular area, and yet we can still leverage many of those capabilities. We see that in storage all the time, right? I mean, I've got all of this organizational data. I want to be able to get it into my AI environment, but yet I'm not sure what's necessary to be able to make that transition work or how this actually takes place. There's a lot that's involved in wrapping around that. And of course, you need a network that's going to be sufficiently performant to get the data there. Oh, and if you happen to be pulling data, or pushing data to or from cloud, now you've got things you got to worry about on that front. Getting into something that gives you some level of flexibility as you grow just seems to become all that much more critically important in terms of how you actually start to build out and how you expect to grow.
Yeah, and I heard you mention the term worry a few times, and by no means are organizations alone in this journey. Another real prominent theme that came out of the survey was the role of a third party. That could be a managed service provider, a co-location facility, other services provider that have these tailored and unique offerings for helping out with all those different aspects, whether it be storage, whether it be networking, capacity, data center, floor space, power, cooling, you name it. There's someone there to kind of help you along in your journey.
And hopefully provide you some GPUs.
While you're at it, they have a couple laying around.
Well, this has been this interesting part of this whole story. I mean, so often you get various supply chain constraints that may affect different aspects of the way in which a particular project's going. But here you've got something. It's a fundamental computational element, the GPU, that's in such short supply. And when you've got AWS changing the scheduling last year on GPU-based instances because of some of this, because you had people reserving instances and instance hoarding and all sorts of things, to now the rise of these GPU as a service neoclouds, that seems to be a pretty strong indication that in fact we are hitting a bottleneck that's being turned into a market opportunity in the neocloud world. The Vultures, the CoreWeaves, those sorts of folks have built a whole business on the scarcity of one of the fundamental AI elements.
Yeah, just think about who shows up to their front door more often than anyone. It's the big hyperscalers. When they're short on supply, they go to them too.
Actually, that's a really good point, because I think certainly there's that expectation that, of course, the hyperscalers have got as many GPUs as they need, right? They've got exactly the same sort of issues that everybody else has, maybe at a slightly different scale, but certainly something that they're going to need to track. Oh. It really starts to speak to the fact that this is an area where considerations around infrastructure not only need a set of significant consideration coming into this, but looking at that long-term planning aspect is just such a different environment with a whole different set of capabilities. We need to think about how it all is working together, how it interlocks, and how you're going to keep that infrastructure and your AI environment fed with data from the right place and data that's not. We still have to start thinking about things at a higher level of abstraction and understanding that these are all interconnected in ways that, historically we could just go out and, okay, we need some more storage, we'll buy some more storage. Do we need to know what that storage is actually for? Not tremendously. You need performance. We need some networking to interconnect, the cloud capabilities we put together. Okay, great. But we could think about those independently. Now with AI, we've actually got to start thinking about their interactions and at a level in which we're going to start thinking about that level of abstraction around the data and the actual application construction itself about where these are all headed and how there's going to be put together. We need to start thinking about data pipelines. How are we going to manage the data? How are we going to ensure that the data that we have has the quality that we need to be able to make this work? It seems like that interconnectedness is something that is probably the bigger part of this challenge in effectively building AI to support all this.
Yeah, and just taking a step back, on the data side as well, I think, it starts even earlier in that, just knowing what you have and what's of value from the get-go. Just the amount of data, I think our projections, it's a 25% growth rate this year that's expected just due to AI workloads. How are you managing that and all the different formats that it comes in? It could be things that you're pretty used to finding value in, but it could also be pictures, media files. All right, how do you take the value out of that? How do you keep it safe and secure, private, what have you? On the interconnected side, I think we're seeing a lot more movement there in the market as well. Getting back to that topic of memory. How is the CPU, the GPU, the networking, the storage all working together? These used to be treated as very discrete elements, but now they're really not. And that's kind of where all these software stacks are going. Managing them all together in a unified way, moving the memory around and ultimately bringing more value, better insights, faster insights to users and their models.
Well, it's all about generating success around all of this. Not exactly a simple task. Well, thank you, Greg. This has been great. I will point our listeners to the study results and some of the research that's come out of that. But hopefully a lot more that they can bring to the table in terms of understanding this, because this is, again, a whole set of challenges. But again, hopefully we can offer a few insights around this as well.
Yeah, really excited to see where it goes next.
We'll have to have you back, especially at the rate at which things are speeding forward and evolving. But we're at time for this episode. But thanks for being on.
Yeah, Eric, thanks for having me.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr, Faran Mudeoshin, Kira Smith, and Adam Kowalski on the marketing and events teams. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be digging into some of the data movement pieces with Henry Baltazar and talking about some of what he's been looking at. One more piece of this very large AI puzzle. I hope you'll join us then, because there's always something next in tech.